John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to connect.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Tuesday night edition, Air Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Air Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. We got ourselves, listen, it's late August. It feels good. The news is starting to come a little bit faster. And we got ourselves a jam-packed Tuesday night, Wednesday morning episode of the Air Torres Pod. Here's what you need to know about today's show. So we're going to open. We're about a week or so away from the start of week one, that first full slate, 5 days starting next Thursday. And what I want to do, preview week one in a little bit of a different way. Who are the teams that cannot afford a loss in week one? I got 5 of them. I'm curious. You guys and girls, of course, can drop your thoughts, questions, comments in the, in the comment section on YouTube as well. From there, we'll take a quick break. I do want to talk about a very interesting story from Alabama football. A surprise name with a surprise job title gets himself a raise and a promotion before Kalen DeBoer ever coaches a game. But I do think it speaks to kind of the new age, the new world of college football, of college sports. And finally, listen, I know I keep saying we're going to switch gears. We're going to get off college hoops. But stuff just keeps coming up, and we got some news over the last couple days. The SEC has released its basketball schedule. We now know when John Calipari is set to return to Kentucky. And also, Maui Invitational bracket is released. I'll just share some very, very, very quick thoughts on the Maui Invitational returning to Lahaina in November. Before we get started, a couple quick reminders. Make sure that you are subscribed to the Air Torres Sports Podcast. New episodes 3 times a week. We're full speed ahead now, maybe even more, depending on the week. You can listen on Apple. You can listen on Spotify. Appreciate everybody's support. If you want to do me a favor, leave a quick 5-star rating and review of the show. Really would appreciate that. Also, if you're not subscribed on YouTube, make sure to do so. So that way, when we go live, we're going to be doing live reactions, things of that nature. Make sure to go ahead and hit subscribe so that you know when we're live, you know when we're reacting to stuff. We'll be doing it a lot during college football season. Appreciate everybody's support. It is full speed ahead. We got some big announcements with guests, with some advertisers, things like that. So it is almost here. The season is almost here. Cannot wait. And so with that said, as far as our Tuesday night show is concerned, there is no more time to waste. Let's go ahead. Let's get to that topic of the day. And the topic of the day, listen, week one is coming, okay? And we're still kind of in the react to what we think is going to happen as opposed to what actually happens on the field. But with week one now, 9 days away? That first Thursday is coming up. Big games on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday of Labor Day weekend. It's coming fast. It's coming furious. We get a little taste and preview in week 0 this coming Saturday. But I want to go ahead and focus on week one, okay? And so this is the time. Everybody's giving their week one previews. This is who I like. This is who's going to lose. This is what it means. Blah, 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 blah. It's all just white noise, right? What I want to do is something a little bit different in terms of how I want to go ahead and look at week one of the college football season. We're going to preview the games themselves next week, probably on Tuesday or Wednesday. But today, what I want the focus to be on is what are not only the most important games, but who are the teams that need a win the most? In other words, come that Monday, Tuesday after Labor Day weekend, who are the teams that we're going to be talking about that it was a debacle or a disaster if this team lost or if that team lost? And I want to go ahead and talk about it before we do a couple quick caveats. First of all, I'm going to go ahead and eliminate any game that a team should win, right? Like we all know it'll be a debacle if Alabama loses to Western Kentucky in week one, so we probably don't need to preview that game. We also, and you know who your favorite team is playing. Kentucky's playing Southern Miss, whoever. the bottom line is we're focusing on the big games, the big results, the results that matter. But two, I also want to look at it again from the importance of the individual game and the individual result. And so to be really quick, let me give you an example. Georgia-Clemson, great game, huge game. I don't know that in the 12-team playoff era, a loss is crippling for either side. Clemson, of course, could be the ACC champ. They could end up being the 1 seed, 2 seed, 3 seed, 4 seed. They got to just win the ACC. The Georgia game's fun. It's nice. It's a litmus test, but it ultimately doesn't matter. So I don't know that that game's big for Clemson from the normal perspective that we would look at it. And the same for Georgia. Georgia doesn't want to lose that game, but if they do, they got Texas on the schedule. They got Bama on the schedule. Plenty of time to make up ground. So who are the teams that absolutely, positively need week 1 wins? I'm going to give you my top 5, and I'm actually going to start in the order of most important. In other words, this team cannot lose. Let's start with number 1, and let's start with a team that I actually might be a little bit off the radar, but I think is a very clear, very obvious number 1. That is the Colorado Buffaloes. That is right. Coach Prime Deion Sanders opens year 2 at Colorado against North Dakota State. We all know about them. They are the FCS football power. They play Colorado in week 1 on that first Thursday. And what's interesting is Colorado's only about a 9.5 point favorite. And so why this game is important, I don't think you need me to tell you, but it goes without saying. The bottom line is this. 1, first of all, just want to put all my cards on the table. I am a Deion Sanders guy. I am a Deion Sanders supporter. I don't think he's perfect. I don't love everything that he does. I think there's some stuff, chirping at reporters that didn't even ask him questions. Like there are things that he does that I don't love. But at the same time, this was a guy that went 22-3 in his final 2 years at Jackson State. And I do believe he can coach. And I think Colorado has a chance to be pretty good this year. I don't think they're going to be 12-0. Don't think they're going to be 10-2. But I think 7-5, 8-4 is in play. Shedeur Sanders is back. But more importantly, not just Shedeur Sanders, NFL quarterback, but what's actually important is they've basically improved the talent at basically every single position group outside of quarterback. Running back room's better. Wide receiver room might be the best in the Big 12. Offensive line is certainly better. Added a bunch of transfers along with Jordan Seaton. The defensive line, they've added 4 or 5 all-conference caliber guys from these power conferences. So I think this team is going to be good. I think they're going to surprise some people. Doesn't really matter what I think, though. What matters is what happens on the field. And this is a game they have to come out. They have to be ready to go. And I think they have to not only win, but make a statement. They play week 2 at Nebraska, week 3 at their rival Colorado State. And from there, they get into Big 12 play. And the Big 12 is going to be good this year. 5 teams ranked in the top 25 in the Big 12. All 5 of them are on Colorado's schedule. And so if you lose this game, 1, any goodwill, anyone like me who actually believes in this team, I think all that goodwill goes out the window. Then you just become a sideshow. Then you just become a punching bag, laughing stock kind of program. This is a game that you need to win. And I'll also mention this very quickly. North Dakota State, we think of them as this juggernaut, power, never lose, Carson Wentz, Trey Lance program. They haven't been that for a minute. You know the last time they won a national championship at their level? 2021. Obviously not that long ago, but last year they went 11-4. Their head coach left to take a job at USC. They have a new head coach. So FCS program, haven't had the high-level success the last 2 or 3 years. New head coach, you have to win this game if you are Colorado. Colorado is number 1, in my opinion, certainly the most important team in terms of need a win in week 1, need to make a statement. By the way, should mention that's a Thursday night game. That's going to be a pseudo standalone game. You lose that game, you become a sort of punching bag, laughing stock. You got to get that win. Number 2, in terms of teams that I think have the most important games in week 1 and absolutely positively need a week 1 win, I'm going to say the LSU Tigers. And Brian Kelly, listen, a couple things on Brian Kelly. 1, much like Deion, I'm a believer. I've told the story a million times. He came to Cincinnati many years ago as I was finishing up my time at UConn. And I watched him take Cincinnati from a very good program under Mark D'Antonio to a great elite program under Brian Kelly. So the guy I've been following his career for 15 years. And to his credit, he's had a really good, probably 4 or 5 months, really since that moment in the spring where he lost out on a few guys and he said, we don't buy players here, blah, 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 blah. They've crushed it in high school recruiting. They actually have the number 3 class in America behind only Ohio State and Bama. Hired some good assistant coaches. It feels like the vibes are good around LSU. But at the end of the day, you know how summer vibes disappear like that? Go ahead and lose a week 1 game against a USC team that you're favored against. But more importantly, it's not just that you lose against USC, because I think USC could be improved. But 2, this would be the 3rd straight year. This is Brian Kelly's 3rd year. This would be the 3rd straight year you lose the opener. And the one thing I'll say about LSU fans, they're as passionate as any in the SEC. And it's all good. It's all fun until you lose that first game. And I just feel like the last 2 years, Brian Kelly has really put himself behind the 8 ball with his own fan base in terms of you lose that opening week game, then you got explaining to do, what's wrong, why you doing this, why you doing that. And so for them, I just think you have to get off on a good foot. You lose this game, again, the season's not over in the 12-team playoff era, but you're just behind the 8 ball. People are questioning you again. This is a game Brian Kelly has to win. We'll see if he does, because I think it's going to be a good game. We'll start previewing it next week. Number 3, in terms of the most important teams and important week 1 games, in my opinion, it's the Florida Gators, okay? So Florida, this is an interesting one, and it's maybe sort of a little bit unfair. They do open week 1 at home against Miami. And why I say it might be a tiny little bit unfair is because they're actually an underdog in this game. And so Miami is a slight road favorite in the Swamp. So if you lose this game, Vegas kind of thinks you're going to lose. It's not a shocker. But the reason it's important, you guys and girls all know, it's all the stuff that we've talked about the last couple of weeks. And we talked about Billy Napier in the hot seat quite a bit on Sunday night show, is that you lose this game. Listen, for Billy Napier, I think, kind of what I just said about Brian Kelly. I think his fans were furious with him last December when the recruiting class fell apart, when you finish 5-7, when you don't make a bowl game. But like any other fan base, I think over time, over the summer, recruiting kind of stabilizes. You kind of build some momentum, and it feels like Florida fans are back to, we believe in this guy. We want to believe in this guy. It's going to be good. He'll figure it out. Not everybody, but I think more than you think. Same time, here's the issue. You lose week 1. All the credibility that you've been working 8-9 months to rebuild within your own fan base, it's gone in one day. But more importantly to me, why it's important is I don't know if you can regain it, especially with that schedule. Like, as an example, Florida plays Miami at home week 1. Well, you play Texas A&M 2 weeks later at home. And if you lose, and say you lose in embarrassing fashion to Miami, are fans fired up to show up 2 weeks later to watch Texas A&M? I don't know that they are. And so that's why this is so important. And then there's obviously the big picture stuff of, you don't win this game, the chances of you putting together a season that you need to keep your job probably doesn't feel that good, because we know what the schedule looks like. Forget the last 5. You got to play at Tennessee early in the season. You got A&M, as I said. Kentucky is a team that has given you fits the last couple years. So you start to look around. It's hard to find all those wins on the schedule that you need to keep your job. So this is an important one for Billy Napier. I understand he's an underdog, but this one's important. Number 4, let's go to the ABC primetime game. College game day is going to be in College Station, where Notre Dame is about a 3.5 point favorite right now against Texas A&M. And to me, this is kind of an important game for Notre Dame. They're at number 4. Now, listen, you go into a 100,000 seat stadium, you don't win. I don't think torches are going to come out for Marcus Freeman and his job status. That's not what I'm saying. But Texas A&M first-year head coach Mike Elko just got there. Connor Wigman's coming off injury. And if you're Notre Dame, I think this is where it gets more important. Where it gets important, in my opinion, is if you lose that game, look at the rest of the schedule. We talked about this one of the shows recently. I can't remember when. But if Notre Dame loses this game, they only have 2 other games all season long against ranked opponents. They play Florida State at home in early November, and they end the season at USC. We don't know what either of those teams is going to be like. There's nobody really on the schedule, maybe a Louisville, but there aren't very many other teams that you even see the scenario where they're good. And so where I think it gets interesting is let's say Notre Dame loses to A&M in this game. Let's say they then lose to Florida State. Let's say then that USC kind of does what we kind of think they are. They're like a 7-5 team. If that's your best win to end the season, and you're competing with an Ole Miss or a Missouri or a Michigan or somebody that plays in one of these super conferences with all these tough games, you're not going to have very much of a resume for an at-large bid. And I think we always default to, well, if Notre Dame has this record or if this SEC team has that record, they're in the playoff. And yeah, I think if Notre Dame's undefeated, if they have one loss, if they win 11 straight games after Texas A&M, they'll be fine. But if you lose to A&M and you lose one other, it's hard to find the great wins on the schedule. So that to me is why it's so important. I think it's more of a this win. I don't think there's any point in the season where that win won't matter at all for Notre Dame. Because remember, by the way, Texas plays at Texas A&M later in the year. LSU plays at Texas A&M. So that's a game also when you start comparing resumes late. If LSU's 10-2, if Notre Dame's 10-2, if LSU's 10-2 with Notre Dame, with Texas, you're going to say, well, wait a second now. Notre Dame lost at Texas A&M, but Texas just won there to end the regular season. Yeah, Texas has to get in the playoff. That's why Notre Dame is 4 to me. Number 5, really quickly, before we switch gears, get to some Bama football, some interesting stuff that happened there. Number 5, in terms of the most interesting and impactful and meaningful games, it's the other side of that LSU-USC game. Now, this one's interesting. I'm obviously talking about USC. And it's tough because I look at the USC situation. I don't think it's almost like Florida. You can't really blame USC if USC ends up losing that game. They're not favored. So it's not about losing that game. But it's kind of about the energy that you have coming in and the energy that you have going out. Because right now, everybody's down on Lincoln Riley. Oh, he stinks. He's overrated. Tebow. You know, they call him Tebow. TBOW, that B word out west. That's how they refer to Lincoln Riley. That's not my nickname for him. That's everybody else's. But you have this weird offseason where you have no momentum. You're coming off a 8-5 season. You lost every meaningful game on the schedule until the bowl game. The defense was terrible. And even if people don't expect you to win this game, by the way, it was funny. I was at the airport like 2 days ago, LAX. I happen to be wearing an old LSU hat I bought at another airport a million years ago. I had a USC fan come up to me and say, we're going to get killed in that game. So it's not that like, you lose this game, the fan base turns on you. But let's say you lose this game 49-31. And your defense can't stop anybody just like they couldn't stop anybody last year. And you're coming off a 7-5 regular season. And you're coming off an off season where there's been just weird noise. You want to cancel the Notre Dame series. You tried to cancel this LSU game. What is the vibe around Lincoln Riley after that week 1 game? So for me, it's not about winning or losing, but you can't get embarrassed if you're Lincoln Riley. Those to me, the 5 most important, 5 most impactful week 1 games. Colorado, you got to win. Florida, you got to win. LSU, obviously, we just talked about LSU's opponent, USC, and Texas A&M. By the way, about a week from now, I think we'll give our official week 1 picks. But I am so fired up for the start of college football season. It is going to be a blast. Tell you what we're going to do. Going to go ahead, take a quick break. We're going to come back. When we come back, very, very interesting news out of Alabama. Alabama, a surprise coach, a guy that you may have never heard of, in a role that you may have never heard of. He just got a big raise, and it is way more significant than you think. We'll take a quick break, discuss that. Be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. By the way, YouTube chat, very quiet. Drop your comments, drop your thoughts. Thought there'd be a little bit more action in the YouTube comment section today. Go ahead, drop your thoughts and your comments in today. With that said, what I do want to do, I want to stay on football because I saw a very interesting topic that to me speaks to the present and the future of college football. And I think it might have slipped under the cracks a little bit, but it's something we got to discuss. So you probably saw the headline, but on Monday night, a major assistant coach at Alabama, a very important piece to Kalen DeBoer's first coaching staff, got quite a significant raise. Wasn't offensive coordinator Nick Sheridan. Wasn't defensive coordinator Kane Womack. Wasn't any position coach. Wasn't even someone that is going to run a single drill at a single practice for Alabama this year. Instead, it was a gentleman by the name of Courtney Morgan, Alabama football's GM, their general manager. Well, on Monday night, Courtney Morgan got a raise and an extension. By the way, before Alabama has even played a game in the Kalen DeBoer era, as he is now set to make well over $800,000 as Alabama's GM, off the field role, player personnel, nothing to do with coaching. But the bottom line is this. If you want to talk about the new era of college football and college sports that we're entering, I'm here to tell you this is like a flashing red light, important moment in time for college sports. Courtney Morgan, Alabama's GM, officially the highest paid player personnel guy. Don't think it's slowing down, but credit to Alabama for getting this done. Because again, even though they haven't played a game, they have the number 2 recruiting class in the country. And this guy was hotly pursued by USC, who's trying to hire him for a very similar role. But again, I think it speaks to the fact that we got a GM now making close to $1 million. It shows you where we're headed in college football. What I want to do, spend just a few minutes talking about this and really explain who this guy is and really explain what the GM actually does in college football. Because I think there's this perception about the job that I don't think necessarily matches reality. By the way, we're actually, there's a GM of a Power 4 program that I'm pretty close with. I'm going to try to get on here in the next few weeks just to explain what the job is. But first off, who is Courtney Morgan? Okay. So Courtney Morgan is, in my opinion, I believe to be one of the best and at the very least, certainly most well-respected player personnel guys in all of college football. Okay. He was a guy that was at Michigan about 4 or 5 years ago, right as Harbaugh really got things rolling. He was the guy that helped put together that roster, certainly played a role. You know, I think even if you ask him, he doesn't want to take too much credit. It's Jim Harbaugh, it's Sharon Moore, it's some of the other assistant coaches, but he was kind of the guy that was in charge of player personnel. Then Kalen DeBoer gets the Washington job. He follows Kalen DeBoer to Washington, helps them build a team that's good enough to compete for a national championship last year. And this was actually a little bit of a story going into the title game. How this gentleman had his hands in player personnel and helping build the roster at Michigan and Washington, the 2 teams that played for the national championship. Where I think he kind of came into focus, though, was just actually a few days later when Nick Saban retired and Kalen DeBoer took the Alabama coaching job. And at the time, I remember talking about this, and I don't know if anybody else would remember, but when Kalen DeBoer officially accepted the Alabama job, there was only one person from Washington, from Seattle, that got on the plane with him coming from the Washington job to Alabama. Again, it wasn't the OC, wasn't the DC, wasn't the special teams coordinator, wasn't the passing game coordinator. It was Courtney Morgan, his player personnel guy. So it shows you the value that Kalen DeBoer had, what Kalen DeBoer saw in Courtney Morgan's value. And it shows you the increasing value of the GM role in college football. Now, again, to be clear, I think this job's probably a little bit different than a lot of people think. And what I want to do is just dive into what the GM does, because it's probably a little bit different than the NFL. I think in the NFL, people think that, or they don't think it is, the GM's the guy that scouts, that evaluates, that drafts, that signs free agents, that handles money, that negotiates contracts. It ain't like that in college football, at least certainly not at some of these high-profile schools. At Alabama, like Courtney Morgan, in my opinion, and this is why he's so good, and I'm going to fully explain, guy wears a lot of hats, okay? First of all, he's in charge of player personnel. And even that role in the last 4 or 5 years has taken on a completely different role and responsibility. Used to be, you know how it was. You don't need me to tell you, but it was, you'd invite a couple hundred kids to summer camp. You work them out. You offer 75 of them. You hope 25 of them commit. Boom, there's your recruiting class. And I'm being a little facetious. It's obviously was more complicated than that. But it was mostly just evaluating high school players, watching junior tape, watching senior tape, getting ahead on the younger classes, putting out offers, whatever. Well, this portal thing has completely changed everything. And that's why you see these player personnel staffs increasingly getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point that you have the Florida coaching staff that has 1,000 people on it. It's not 1,000, but it is literally 200 people. Is because you're not just evaluating high school seniors or high school juniors, but you're doing all that while also having your finger on the pulse of the portal. And understand, portal recruiting doesn't start the day the portal opens. And where somebody like Courtney Morgan, where these player personnel guys come in, is that they're just kind of keeping their finger on the pulse of pretty much everything that even could happen during portal season. So let's say Jimbo Fisher gets fired. Okay, well, we got to start figuring out, okay, who from Texas A&M is probably going to enter the portal? Who's probably going to stay? Okay, that kid's dad was a player at A&M, so he's probably not going to leave. He's going to stay. What happens if Mike Elko takes the, there's just so many variables that go into it. Okay, who are the FCS All-Americans that have the extra year of COVID eligibility that may want to get out? Who are the guys in the Ivy Leagues that are going to graduate with that degree from Harvard or Yale that are good enough to play at our level? By the way, who are the guys that are not good enough to play at our levels? And here's the key too. Not all these guys enter the portal, but you have to be ready for everything. You have to be prepared. You have to know who's good enough. You have to know who's not. But more importantly, and this is where I think a guy like Courtney Morgan doesn't get enough credit, and we need to make sure to give him credit. It's about the relationships and the contacts within the industry that you have to get the players to even consider your school, let alone get them to commit. And at the end of the day, listen, I know we talk about NIL nonstop in this world that we live in college sports, but at the same time, to me, it's actually much more complicated than that, okay? Because listen, if you're being recruited by Alabama, it means you're also being recruited by Ohio State and Oregon and Tennessee and Texas A&M and whoever. And it means that wherever you go, NIL is going to be there. And so really what it is about having those relationships so that, one, you can get in the door, but two, the student athlete, whether he's a transfer, whether he's a high school player, whether he's whatever, he knows if I go there, hey, if I'm in the portal, I got 2 weeks to make a decision. I got to go. Where can I go that I know I'm going to be in good hands? And so whether it's the high school coach, the 7-on-7 coach in basketball, it's obviously the AAU coach. Is it a parent? Is it an uncle? Who are the people that have influence, and what are your relationships with them? And so where a guy like Courtney Morgan is so valuable, I think everybody says, Bama or Oregon, they're just dropping bags. That's all recruiting. No, it's not. And that's where a guy like this comes in, is if there is a 5-star, who does he have the relationship with? Do you know him? How do we get to know him? Where is he based out of? Is it a trainer that has his ear? Is it a high school coach that has his ear? And then whoever it is, do we have a good relationship with them? Can we get this kid to pick up our phone call? Can we get this kid to visit campus? Can we get this kid to commit? Does he want to commit on site? Does he want, these are all things that go into the process. And as a matter of fact, a lot of these general managers, they're not even the ones dealing with the money. It's you get them to campus, you do whatever, then you bring in the collective to kind of help. The collective kind of handles all the money part. Now, you might have an idea, you might have an understanding of what the number the player expects is, but at the end of the day, that's not what a GM does. And so that's why I just want to give Courtney Morgan credit, because he is a guy that in a short amount of time, I think he's about 31, 32 years old, he has built this wide-ranging web of relationships. And that is so important in this world. By the way, want to know why Kalen DeBoer is having so much success? Want to know why they have the number 2 recruiting class in the country? I'm not saying it's not a group effort. I'm not saying Kalen DeBoer doesn't play a role and assistant coaches don't play a role and recruiters on the road don't play a role, but it all starts with the relationship of the GM of Courtney Morgan. So one, credit to this guy because he's clearly great at what he does. Built 2 national championship caliber rosters at Washington and Michigan, helped build them. Comes to Alabama, they're immediately recruiting at an elite level. And no, it's not just NIL fans of other schools. I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but it's not just all about NIL. But then credit Alabama, because Alabama, listen, I respect the heck out of what Greg Byrne does down there. I respect the heck out of what Nick Saban built and what Kalen DeBoer is continuing to help evolve and develop. Is that at Alabama, they don't take a backseat to anybody. And you talk to people in college football behind the scenes, they will tell you just how important this guy is to what Alabama has done, to what all of these schools have done, and how crippling it would have been for Alabama to lose him. So Alabama keeps their general manager, Courtney Morgan. He is now making close to over $800,000. And it shows you just how much the player personnel world of college sports has evolved and just how important a role like this is. All right, so what I want to do want to switch gears, do a hard pivot 180 degrees, and I want to talk a little college basketball. So I know I keep saying it. I know I keep saying that, we're going to get off college hoops and there's not that much to talk about and we're going to go full speed ahead on football and blah, 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 blah. But here's the thing. Stuff keeps coming up in basketball that we have to talk about, And so the big piece of news, there's actually been 2 or 3 big basketball pieces of news the last couple of days. But the big piece of news that I do want to address right now is that SEC basketball schedules came out on Tuesday. I think it's kind of interesting, by the way, week before the season, maybe get a little bit of buzz. Listen, I think the SEC does a lot of stuff right. I think they got some stuff wrong with these schedules, but I think they do a lot of stuff right. And I think one thing that they've done right is get this out before football. So guys like me, guys like whoever, John Rothstein, whatever, have a few days to talk about this before football takes over. But I bring it up because the big story in college hoops, we've been wondering, remember, there's only one. When will John Calipari make his return to Kentucky as the head coach at Arkansas? You see Coach Cal at the bottom of the screen if you're watching on YouTube. Well, it became official on Tuesday. John Calipari, the Arkansas Razorbacks, are headed to Rupp Arena on Saturday, February 1st. Plan accordingly. And I'll tell you this, if there is any way for me and producer Matt to be there in the building, the plan is for me and producer Matt to be there in the building because it is going to be crazy. It is going to be insane. And I cannot wait. Couple thoughts on this game. First of all, I'm going to say what we said when it was announced that this team would only play once. The SEC doesn't miss out on much. The SEC doesn't screw up much. I think Greg Sankey's as smart of a guy as we have anywhere in college sports, and they don't miss very many opportunities. They whiffed big time on this one, not allowing Kentucky and Arkansas to play twice. And for people who don't remember the scheduling, there's now 16 teams in the SEC. That's obviously 15 opponents if you include your own favorite school. And the way they're setting up the schedule, at least for the first few years, there are 2 permanent opponents and then one opponent that the SEC can just say, hey, this will be an interesting game. Let's make it happen. So this year, listen, you can't blame the SEC too much because they have Kentucky, Alabama twice. But at the same time, as great as that's going to be, as great as Nate Oates' program is going to be, it is just a colossal failure that these 2 teams are not playing twice. Because listen, bottom line is this will be in my opinion, the most anticipated game of the entire college basketball season. And it makes zero sense that we're only playing it once. Because think about it like this. Think about if this game was on February 1st and the hype and the excitement and the enthusiasm and the boos and the vitriol and the cheers. And we're going to talk about what I think the reaction will be. But imagine if they were playing 3 weeks later to end the regular season. You think CBS, as they start to ramp up their NCAA tournament coverage in March, wouldn't love to have Coach Cal with that return home game at Bud Walton Arena to end the regular season? Because to me, it's a no-brainer. And don't sell me on maybe the schedules were done. We didn't know Coach Cal was leaving until April. I don't care. This schedule did not get released until today, until August 20th. Figure it the freak out. There is no excuse. You need to figure out a way to play these teams to play twice. What I will say, if I'm going to criticize the SEC for only playing this game once, the timing, I will say, is at least pretty good, okay? Now, the best way to end this, the best way to do this would have been to end the regular season with Coach Cal going back to Rupp. That was maybe not realistic just because of the fact that, do you want two teams that have not played each other yet playing on the final day of the regular season? Feels kind of a little bit weird. So I sort of get it. But at the same time, let me at least say this. February 1st is a very important date on the college hoops calendar, and on the sports calendar, really. It is the weekend between the AFC-NFC championship game and the Super Bowl. And so that's going to be the first weekend. So we get football starting August, whatever it is, 26th or whatever week 0 is this week. And we get football in some way, shape, or form every weekend through the final weekend of January. And so that becomes an important date because it will be the first weekend that we will have no football from early August until the end of January, or from late August until late January. And so if the SEC was going to pick a weekend, at least that's the weekend that they picked. At least that's the weekend that makes a little bit of sense from the perspective of, it's a place where, it's a dead spot on the calendar and it's an opportunity for the SEC to have center stage and for college basketball to have center stage as well. So I love the fact that they picked that weekend. I was afraid it was going to be one of these midweek games in January, and listen, love Carl Ravitch and Jimmy Dykes, but this feels like it should have a national stage, a national profile, a national whatever. Really quickly, a couple other thoughts. One, I am curious, and I'd be curious, people can hop in the comment section if you're watching live on YouTube. I'm curious what the reaction of the fans at Kentucky will be. And we talked about this a little bit in the spring when we knew that this game was going to happen. And we kind of did a poll at that time. But I am curious. And the one thing I will say, I think, and this is going to sound crazy if you get in the YouTube comment section sometimes, I think Kentucky fans, I think everyone's starting to take a deep breath, right? It's like, I think at first it was so emotional. This guy's leaving. How dare he? How's he going to leave us? Screw that guy. We don't need him. And I still think there's a degree of that, which is screw that guy. We're better off with Mark Pope. But what I think is interesting is I think most Kentucky fans have said, you know what? We love Cal. We appreciate what he did. It was time for him to go. And he actually did us a favor by leaving. He could be there next year and we could be miserable and he could be miserable. And we're thankful that he gave us a fresh start because now we get to experience this Mark Pope thing, from the start. And so my hunch is I think it's going to be mostly cheers for Coach Cal, especially when you get to February. Now, the one thing I will say, do think it probably depends on how each team is doing. Like, I think we're going to talk about the teams in a minute, but I think Kentucky is going to be better than people think. I keep saying I don't understand how people are projecting them as a fringe top 25 team. But if Kentucky's, 16 and 11 or whatever, and that's probably not the right, whatever. If they're 13 and 10 or whatever they are, then yeah, I think the boos will be a little bit more vicious because fans will be a little bit more mad. Like, why does this team isn't living up to our expectations, especially by the way if Arkansas is good. Now, if Arkansas is 13 and 10, I think most Kentucky fans will be like, thank goodness he's gone and we're happy and Mark Pope's awesome and blah, 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 and this and that. And so I'm curious what the response will be. But lastly, let me go ahead and say this, is that I'm curious for the game itself on the court. Because to me, these are two really good teams. And I know everyone's going to say, oh, Cal doesn't win the games that matter. Well, guess what? I watched him go finish second place in the SEC at Kentucky last year. And I can't say that his first Arkansas roster is more talented. No Reed Shepherd, no Rob Dillingham, no whatever. It's going to be good, though. Got a bunch of guys that are older college players. Got a bunch of guys that are older college players that played for him, Adu Thiero, DJ Wagner, Big Z, etc. So I think this Arkansas team is going to be really good. And the one thing about Coach Cal, his players swear by him. His players fight for him. You know Arkansas is going to give their best effort. But I also know that Rupp crowd is going to be insane. And like I said a minute ago, I think that Kentucky team is way better than people give them credit for. What is it? 7 fifth-year seniors, 4 guys who averaged double figures last year in power conferences, Kirk Risa, Otega Owe, Jackson Robinson, Andrew Carr, best three-point shooter in the portal, Kobe Brea, best perimeter defender, Lamont Butler, best interior defender, Amari Williams. They just beat the Kentucky TBT team in a closed-door scrimmage. So that game is going to be good. I think Kentucky's going to be better than people realize, but that game is going to be awesome. I cannot wait. And again, I'll be curious if anybody has some thoughts on the game in the comment section below. By the way, I did mention this a minute ago with this. Just did not love how the SEC put together this schedule. Listen, I get Bama, Kentucky is great, but here's another example of like, what are we even doing? Like, what are we even doing in terms of this schedule? Final day of the regular season, Kentucky at Missouri. What is that for a game? Like, what are we doing? By the way, Arkansas, they do open at Tennessee, which is obviously Coach Cal against Tennessee. That will be a very, very, very interesting game. But at the same time, who do they close with? They close with Mississippi State at home. Again, I just feel like the SEC, listen, you got a chance to really make some waves. New league, 16 teams, some intriguing matchups. Cal versus Arkansas or Cal versus Kentucky. Just feel like you completely kind of whiffed on the decision-making process here. Really quickly, one other note that I do want to get to from the college hoops world, and did not think we were going to be talking quite so much college hoops on a day like today, middle of the week on a Wednesday. Maui Invitational bracket was released. And the Maui Invitational, to me, bracket is very interesting because one of the great events, and it is worth noting, not only is it a great event, but it's worth noting, returns to Lahaina. So remember last year, there was the awful fires in Maui. And Maui, for people who haven't been, I've been blessed. I actually went on my honeymoon there. It is an unbelievable. Maui is an amazing place. That arena is tiny. True story. I think I've told it on the pod before, but made my wife try to drive by the gym where they play the Maui Invitational while we were in Maui. And it's like basically a tiny little gym in like a rec center that obviously can hold 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, whatever it is for big games. But it's crazy how small that place is. So the bracket comes out. Cannot wait to see this back in in that space. And there's really 5-6 teams that are worth discussing. I'm going to give you the bracket and we'll just talk a little bit about it. UConn, 2-time defending champs, if you have not heard, they play Memphis. And then on the same side of the bracket, Michigan State versus Colorado. The other side of the bracket, Iowa State versus Auburn. And then North Carolina versus Dayton. Did not realize that my alma mater and producer Matt's alma mater are both playing. Not saying we'll take the road trip for Thanksgiving, but be nice to think about. But in terms of the bracket, like I think the intriguing thing is a couple things. One, first of all, UConn's just playing in this event. And right now they are, no pun intended, the top dog in all of college basketball. And so I am curious, the response, the reaction. North Carolina, a school like North Carolina would normally be a headliner in an event like this. But when you're the 2-time defending champion, when everybody's looking up at you, you're going to get everybody's best shot. They open with Memphis. By the way, first of all, interesting because of the Maui time change. That game actually starts at like 9:30 local time. So we'll see if there's a slow start there. But UConn, they'll play likely Michigan State in round 2. Michigan State's just kind of one of these programs. There's not much going on with them right now. I don't really have any amazing takes. Like Tom Izzo kind of feels like he's just kind of still doing the job, but is he still really doing it at a high level? The other side of the bracket's where it gets interesting, though, because Iowa State, remember, they are the reigning Big 12 tournament champions. They beat Houston in that tournament championship game. and they made the Sweet 16. They lost to Illinois. They returned like 4 of their top 5 guys. And most people, including me, have Iowa State in their top 10, but Auburn also returns a ton as well. Janai Broome, maybe the most accomplished player in the SEC that's returning, is back. Chad Baker-Mazara, a player that I really like, even though I think he got thrown out of that NCAA tournament game, if I remember correctly. So interesting team. They had a couple nice pieces in the portal. And I think Auburn's going to be really good. I think we've spent so much time over the course of this summer talking about, we've spent so much time talking about Arkansas, Kentucky, Alabama, even Tennessee. I don't think people realize Auburn, they might have, outside of Alabama, the best balance of returning talent with high-end talent. Wouldn't surprise me if they ended up winning the SEC. And then Carolina in that late game against Dayton. Dayton obviously loses a ton. Not only Kobe Brea, who transferred to Kentucky, but also remember they had that kid drafted, Deron Holmes, who was, I believe, a late first-round pick. So North Carolina plays the winner of Iowa State-Auburn. That Iowa State-Auburn, probably a top 15 matchup. That'll be a fun one. And then we would expect UConn to come out of the other side of the bracket. So it's either going to be UConn, Iowa State, UConn, Auburn, UConn, North Carolina. But it should be a really, really, really fun event. And it's crazy because as much as it seems like college hoops is a million years away and everything's focused on college football, guess what? College hoops is coming faster than you think. All right, think it's a little bit of a quieter comment section today. That's okay. It's no big deal. We'll go ahead and get out of here. Appreciate everybody's support, everybody tuning in on a Tuesday night to our this edition of the Aaron Torres pod. I'm so excited for football to start. Listen, blessed to do what I do. Zero complaints. But what I would also say, I'm so ready to have real stuff to talk about and react to. Like I said, we'll have some week 0 coverage certainly in the coming days. But then it's really week 1. It's starting to preview week 1. It's starting to talk week 1. And I just cannot wait for what I believe will be a fascinating week 1, starting again on Thursday with the Colorado North Dakota State game. We'll be reacting after that. We'll be reacting after the Saturday night. Well, probably do have to do a Sunday morning show, but we will be doing a Sunday night show as well right after that LSU USC game. Time to get out of here. If you're not subscribed, please make sure to do so. By the way, a couple people asking me about Jasper Johnson, the recruit. Listen, he has set his commitment date for next week. Every day it changes a little bit. 2 days ago, I said I think Kentucky's the leader. Now people are saying Alabama's back in control. I'm going to stick with Kentucky for right now. This is a fluid situation. But like I said, Kentucky got all the momentum. Then he set his commitment date. And until I hear otherwise, let me put it this way. Like I said on Sunday night show, let me put it this way. How do I put this delicately? It's not just what you're hearing from the Kentucky side. Does Kentucky feel like they made up ground? It's what are you hearing from the other sides as well? Does North Carolina still feel like they're in good shape? Does Alabama still feel like they're in good shape? And again, as of, Sunday into Monday, I think those other schools felt like they were fading. Now, maybe they've made up ground, but I still think, Jasper Johnson, local kid, has been spending more time around the state, was at the TBT tournament. His parents obviously still live in Kentucky. Unless I hear something different between now and when he actually commits, and maybe I will, I think it's still going to be Kentucky. It remains to be seen. But remember, I said on Sunday night show, I said it's not 100%. It's not done. I did say, I think 55-45 that Kentucky took the lead over everybody else. So we'll see what happens from there. All right. I think it is time for me to get out of here. One more question. Tide men's basketball predictions. That's from Bruce. Bruce, I'll tell you, I think Alabama's the number 1 team in the country going into next year. I call them Noah's Ark. They got 2 of everything. And I think, if anything, the only issue that Alabama has to worry about, which is the definition of a first world problem, is they got to figure out, do they have too many good players, which sounds crazy, but I don't think that it is. You have Mark Sears. I don't think Mark Sears is going to be able to put up the stats he did last year just because there's so much talent returning. But how do you manage Grant Nelson? How do you manage Jaron Stevenson, who's coming back to be a pro next year. You got the 2 McDonald's All-Americans. You got the transfers, Chris Youngblood and Hunter Millette coming off the bench. So I think it's going to be interesting to see Nate Oates and how he manages minutes. But what I will say, I think it's the most talented roster in college basketball. It's the number 1 team in the country as far as I'm concerned. And I will say, like, the schedule is tough. The schedule is going to challenge some people. I think it was Trilly Donovan had one of those discords where they had one of the Alabama assistant coaches on, and the assistant coach basically said that they told Nate Oates, this isn't the best way to schedule for a high seed. And Nate Oates just said, I want to play as many tough games as possible because I want to get my team ready for the SEC. By the way, I would note, I think got them ready for the SEC last year. Remember, they went into the final 10 days or so of the SEC having the opportunity to win the league. Remember, they hosted Tennessee late in February. If they win that game, I believe they were in sole possession of first place. So Nate Oates, in my opinion, he uses the out-of-conference, and this year they'll play Purdue in Alabama. They'll play Illinois at some point. They'll play in that Vegas event. They'll play Houston in that event. They use that out-of-conference to see everything and play everybody so that they can be prepared for SEC play. But they're the number 1 team in the country to me. Like Kansas, like UConn, like some of the other schools. But Alabama, in my opinion, should be the number 1 team in the country. I really like them. Doesn't mean they're going to win the national championship, but I think they are the best team on paper. All right. I think it is time for me to get out of here. Appreciate a couple last-minute questions, but it's time for me to go. Do me a quick favor. If you're not subscribed to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure that you are subscribed. Also, make sure to rate and review the show. Go ahead, give us a quick 5 stars. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, all that good stuff. Make sure you're following on social media at Aaron_Torres on Twitter, at Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, Aaron Torres Podcast Questions at gmail.com. Also, I'll tell you, I do have a professional Facebook page. Find me on Facebook. Just search Aaron Torres. Probably a place I need to start putting out some more content. But anyway, I'm going to get out of here. Appreciate everybody's support. Awesome show today. Appreciate everybody hopping in. We'll be back on Thursday night. Probably a little bit of a week 0 preview, as well as anything else that happens. Talk to you then. Shout out to Torrent Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Reddick, you F-head. Unblock me.